Okay, so before I begin, I have to qualify the form of atheism I'm going to be talking about in this video and why I'm focusing my attention on it. Because every time I do a video about atheism, I inevitably get multiple video replies from atheist channels accusing me of lumping atheism into one subset or just attacking a straw man. Obviously, not all atheists are the same or believe the same things, but this kind of atheism I want to examine today was adhered to and promoted by some of the most prominent atheists in history. And the comments I most often see from atheists on my channel are assuming the truth of this system of thought, which is naturalism. Naturalism is the belief that only the natural world exists and that all phenomena can be explained from within it. There is no supernature or the supernatural or dimensions of reality outside the natural world. And if we hope to inquire about reality, the physical sciences, which focus their field of inquiry on the natural world, is all that we need. And since only the natural world exists, we have no need of a God who exists outside the natural world because there is no outside the natural world. And when I've addressed this belief as a form of atheism in the past, I had multiple comments and video replies claiming that this version of atheism is utterly foreign to them and that I'm erecting a straw man to make my job easier. Which I have to admit I was a little dumbfounded by, because this view was held and promoted by a whole cast of extremely prominent and influential thinkers such as David Hume, Karl Marx, whose theories about history, politics, and human nature are astonishingly resilient and influential in spite of the tens of millions of dead people who were victims of those ideas. Bertrand Russell, who should need no introduction, John Dewey, who basically revolutionized education as we know it, and virtually all of the new atheists such as Dawkins, Dennett, and Harris. As far as I can understand them, they all appear to be naturalists. So please don't reply that this is an uncommon form of atheism. It is arguably the most common, which is why I primarily focus my attention on it. But I've also heard several replies that have claimed that atheism isn't a belief or a worldview or a system of thought at all. It's just withholding of belief in God or gods until sufficient evidence can be offered, which, okay, if that's how you define your atheism, then well and good. But that's not how atheism has historically been defined. And the cast of characters I just named, like Russell and Dewey and Marx and Hume, they wouldn't agree with that definition. And I simply, forgive me for saying this, I just don't believe people who have entire YouTube channels dedicated to explaining their thinking as mere withheld beliefs. I've withheld my beliefs on a whole range of subjects like Bigfoot or UFOs, which is why I don't spend any time talking about them. The things that I don't believe in aren't of interest to me. I don't write books about them, and I don't erect YouTube channels to debunk them or the people who believe in them. I also don't identify myself with a term like a Bigfooter. But considering people do call themselves atheists, they write books about their atheism and publish YouTube channels and blogs all about their atheism, seems to me that withheld beliefs is the last thing you could describe them as. And they might say the only reason they're putting so much effort into describing their beliefs is as a defensive response because Christians are always trying to force their beliefs on others. To which I would say, well, now who's building straw men? Because forcing people to believe in Christianity isn't something that goes on anywhere in the world today. And if you could find instances of it, it would be the rarest of exceptions. It's also quite offensive to make this accusation. There are multiple genocides taking place right now as I'm making this video against Christian populations in places like Syria and Nigeria. But there are no Christian populations murdering Muslims or Buddhists or Hindus in order to eradicate them or force them to convert. But even if Bigfoot believers were somehow forcing everyone to conform to their beliefs, as someone who is agnostic on that question, that is, someone who has withheld his beliefs on the subject, I would simply push back by arguing nobody should be forced to believe something they don't think is true or that hasn't been proven to them. I wouldn't be claiming that they don't exist unless I had compelling positive arguments to make such a claim. So I'm sorry if I simply don't find that convincing, and I don't think neutral observers should either. Atheism is the positive claim that there is no such thing as God, and naturalism is the claim that all reality is contained within the natural physical world, and that nothing outside of it, such as supernature or God, exists whatsoever. And if that were true, then I intend to argue that reason would have to be denied along with it. And I suspect that not too many atheists would be eager to make that concession because reason seems to be the cause they identify with the most in their community or movement or tradition or whatever you want to call it. Sam Harris wrote a book called The End of Faith with the subtext that said The Future of Reason. Richard Dawkins lent his name to The Foundation for Reason in Science. And Bertrand Russell once famously said, as soon as we abandon our reason and are content to rely on authority, there is no end to our troubles. But reason simply can't exist in a naturalist world. If naturalism is true, then reason, like God and religion, is mere illusion, which should be treated with just as much suspicion and perhaps contempt as all of these atheists treat the question of God. And to explain why I make this claim, we have to take a second to describe what reason is. So reason is our ability to examine the world around us and to infer what is true about it. And such inferences often come from things unknown. The answer to a riddle or a problem is only arrived at through reasoning, and we see this all the time in something like algebra. We might say that we don't know what the value of x is, but we do know that y equals 1 and that x equals y. Therefore, our reason is able to uncover the solution, which is that x equals 1. And notice what we're doing when we use our reason. We are moving into the abstract of our minds, the abstract being non-physical reality. Our minds allow us to step outside the reality we are considering and then examine it, weigh it in the balance, and determine based on that deliberation what is true about it. It's as though we are sitting above the facts we are considering and organizing them in a pattern we call reasoning, which then tells us something about the real world that we are considering. But if naturalism is true, then that means that everything and every event can be explained by natural causes. Like you and I are explained by the cause of our parents, and they by their parents, and all the way back until you reach the cause of the human species, which is itself caused by some biological ancestor, which is then caused by biological existence or life itself, and so on and so on. The Earth was presumably caused by some celestial collision of matter, energy, and forces like gravity. My indigestion is caused by the thing that I ate that I shouldn't have. And the natural sciences are the mechanism we have for examining this vast sequence of cause and effect, which explains, in theory, everything that can be explained. But here's where the naturalist runs into a big problem, because the psychological processes in our minds are also natural events, which means that they must have a natural cause if naturalism is true. They must be inevitable events forced to occur by that long chain of events in the sequence of cause and effect. But the kind of reasoning we described earlier is not inevitably caused. It's something that steps outside of the variables and examines them and draws conclusions about them. It appears to sit above and independently from all these natural events. But if it's just one of the natural events in question, then it can't be claimed that it was arrived at through whatever it is that we mean by reason. And we all intuitively seem to know this, because something people do all the time to discredit the opinions of others as irrational is by accusing them of being caused by something other than reason. Actually, Richard Dawkins does this all the time. He says that Christians only believe in Christianity because they were raised in a Christian society. If they had been raised in a Hindu or a Buddhist culture, they would have been Hindu or Buddhist. He's taking for granted that because he can explain the cause of a belief as having its origin in something other than the process we call reasoning, then it is not a reasonable belief. If we can say something like, you only believe that Canada is going to win the hockey game because you're Canadian, or you only think there's a ghost in the next room because you ingested psychedelic mushrooms. If your thoughts are caused by something else, like patriotism or mind-altering drugs, then they aren't based on some independent process we call reason. And if naturalism is true, then all beliefs are actually caused in this way, which would then invalidate reason itself. Far from being free from the impositions of natural causes, it turns out to be subject to and under the dictates of all irrational causes. And if all that is going on in my mind is just a sequence of inevitable effects by irrational causes, why should I trust any of the conclusions of my mind as having something valid to say about the world or about truth? In fact, if what we call reasoning is actually just the caused events in our psychological systems, then whatever we might say about reality is actually just statements about the events in our minds, which really have nothing to do with external reality. Our so-called reasoning about the outside world turns out to simply be utterings about events going on inside of ourselves. And what we call reason is actually just an elaborate trick of those events, which convinces us that we have some freedom in arriving at well thought out conclusions. At the end of the day, abstract reasoning aims at truth, while natural events only produce physical outcomes. If our thoughts are just the result of blind physical causes, there's no reason to trust them as reliable guides to truth, which undermines naturalism itself. That is, unless it's not a trick, and our minds and our faculties of reason actually are independent from the natural system of cause and effect, and cannot be explained as all other events are in this way, which means that in the case of the human being, there is something like a window or a door that opens to the outside of determined natural events. And when we employ our reason, we are walking through that door for a period of contemplation before we return with a conclusion about the world and reality that we just examined, as if we and everything about it aren't fatally determined by it. Okay, thanks for watching. These videos and this channel are only possible because of viewer support, so if you can spare some help, please consider making a contribution through my website at brianholdsworth.ca, or join my locals community at brianholdsworth.locals.com, where you can interact with myself and other like-minded individuals. We actually just started a monthly Zoom meetup where we're studying some articles of St. Thomas Aquinas in his Summa. So if that's interesting to you, then come join us there. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe.